4 suspects have been shot dead in KwaMashu near the corner of Sikhindi and Nandi Drive north of Durban. The suspects are believed to be linked to a number of cash-in-transit heists incidents that have recently taken place in the area. This week alone, there have been 2 such heists north of Durban. The exact circumstances of the heist is not known at this stage.
The forensic team has been hard at work for the past hour or so, and I think they've got a lot of work ahead of them, so they might be here for another few hours. There's a number of rooms in the house that they need to search, and they want to do their work thoroughly, so they will take a while. There were 4 suspects in the house, and all 4 were killed in the shootout. This morning there's been an unrelated arrest, not related to this case. A suspect was arrested in the High Flats area, linked to a attempted cash-in-transit robbery that took place on the south coast on the N2 in May this year. He was found in possession of 2 firearms and a large quantity of ammunition, signal jammer, and a lot of other exhibits. So he's been detained in the High Flats area for that case.
All right, now let's discuss this. We're now joined by teams by Professor Nirmala Gopal, a criminologist with the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Prof, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Now, this week has actually been described as a deadly week for security companies. And when you look at the spate of CIT heists just this week alone, Prof, especially in KZN and in the Eastern Cape, one wonders how the rest of the festive season will look like. Are we likely to see an increase in the next few weeks?
Good afternoon, Unachi, and good afternoon to your viewers. Yes, I think that's an interesting question. Usually these cash-in-transit heists need lots of planning and premeditation. So I think in order for us to really predict whether there will be an increase, on the one hand, we could say that there's a probability there would be an increase because of the large amounts of monies that are involved and people are looking for money. So the motive usually behind cash-in-transit heists is simply for the money. So if people want money ahead of the festive season, there's a probability that we could see a rise. However, I want to also say, given the nature of cash-in-transit heists, given the planning and the prep that goes into it, it means that there are months of planning that these organized syndicates actually put into these CITs. And I think what's very important then is do we have our proactive crime intelligence units who are actually able to find out that this is actually happening, and instead of us seeing a rise in it, they should actually intercept it before we even get to that rise.
And Prof, if you look at just some of the recent incidences, particularly, let's say, in KwaZulu-Natal, where some of these criminals were found to have actually hired a home right in the middle of KwaMashu, of course, being very familiar with the community members, some of whom are not from KZN specifically, but from as far back as Limpopo, as an example. So it talks to us about a number of things, right? So just talk to us about just some of the trends and patterns that you've picked up over the years about, the specifics of how these people operate.
Right, so it's not unusual for them to hire a house. I mean, they either hire whole houses, or they would hire flats, or even hotel rooms. So what that tells us is that they have money. These are people who have money and they're able to invest in these kinds of either accommodation or infrastructure. So that's the first point that I'd like to submit. The next point that I'd like to submit is the fact that it's not unusual for them to be in a separate or in a different province. So, and the fact that they are within communities is not unusual as well, because what they try and do is to reduce their visibility, and they believe that if they are in a community, their visibility will be reduced.
You mentioned a lot about interventions that our law enforcement authorities need to be very good at and specific around, particularly as we speak about cash in transit heists. I mean, when we look at the latest quarterly crime stats, specifically in KwaZulu-Natal, there were 60 cash in transit heists between April and June this year nationwide. Of these, 14 took place in the Eastern Cape and 13 took place in KwaZulu-Natal. And the two provinces, of course, have been earmarked as the highest number of cash in transit heists. What then should law enforcement authorities be able to be very good at in terms of this? I mean, now we know, of course, the latest incident, 4 robbers were shot dead. I would imagine for law enforcement authorities, this is very good news.
Yes, definitely for law enforcement, this would be good news, especially since they've identified the fact that these 4 robbers have been perpetrating a number of these cash in transit heists. But in addition to that, like I said earlier, we need really good proactive crime intelligence. That would be one of the best interventions that we could possibly have. What does bother me, though, is that in 2018, the Minister of Police, as well as the Commissioner Keshlau, who mentioned at the Parliamentary Committee that we need to increase the number of police to deal with cash in transit heists and also to improve crime intelligence in as far as cash in transit heists are concerned. And then my concern is that almost 5 years later, we are still seeing such a high level of cash in transit heists. And the bigger concern is that it affects communities. The fact that these perpetrators are residing within communities means that it has a social impact on those communities.
Prof, as a final question and as we wrap up, I mean, we obviously know that in some instances where crimes of this nature occur, there's always the kingpins. We always want to identify who is behind these cash in transit heists. Is that the same in this instance? For instance, in the mining industry, we know that illegal mining is always associated with a kingpin, somebody with resources, somebody with money. Is that the case also with cash in transit heists, or is this what we are seeing now in terms of the 4 that have been killed? Is that where it begins and ends?
No, I think you're correct. Most of these crimes, especially if they have an organized nature and you have syndicates that operate within these organizations, in all likelihood you'd have a kingpin, or what we sometimes call the CEO. And I think, like you rightfully point out, the person with resources, etc., who actually funds these kinds of crimes. And then you must also remember that the criminals who perpetrate these crimes are most likely career criminals as well. So very highly organized. The organogram exists with your CEO going right down to the person who actually commits the crime. And oftentimes we cannot find the link to the CEO. And that is why we find that this kind of crime is perpetuated and sustained.
Prof, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Really do appreciate it. Of course, that was Professor Nirmala Gopal, a criminologist with the University of KwaZulu-Natal.